Miller Lancaster saga is often called the Lancaster Miller affair, and we'll find out what all that means as we go. But adventure, mystery and intrigue certainly takes place throughout this story. Since Rod Murphy did such a good job with questions last time, I'm going to hit you with a couple of questions to get this underway. I don't expect that you're going to put up your hands and shout answers to me, but just by way of introduction, a slightly different way of looking at things. So who was the first female to travel from England to Australia in an aeroplane?
Earhart.
Jane Batten.
Jean Batten came many years later.
Amelia Earhart.
Amelia Earhart, no. Mrs. Keith Miller. If you were reading the newspapers in 1928, when it happened, she was referred to as Mrs. Keith Miller. She was no relation to the cricketer, Keith Miller. He was only 9 years old. The cricketer was only 9 years old when this flight occurred. And it was common in those days for women to be referred to by their husband's name. So Mrs. John Smith, Mrs. Keith Miller were not unusual terms in those days. Women's lips have changed all that. So what was the nationality of Mrs. Keith Miller?
English.
British.
Australian.
I'm Lebanese.
And so what state of Australia do you think she may have been born in?
Western Australia.
Western Australia, yes. So you've been reading the books. So whereabouts in Western Australia was she born? Southern Cross. So there we are. We can claim her as being West Australian. It's a tenuous link, but we'll hang on to it while we can. And so her father was Mr. Charles Beveridge, who was the manager of the commercial bank in Southern Cross between about 1899 and 1906. It just so happened that the Beveridges had a daughter in 1901 and they named her Jessie. So Jessie Beveridge was the maiden name of this woman who was credited with having flown to Australia and being the first to do so. The family christened her, or not christened her, but called her Chubby. And so that stayed with her for the rest of her life. She certainly wasn't chubby, and when you see photos of her in later life, you'll agree with me, she was certainly no chubby figure. That's an advert for the commercial bank in 1905, and Jessie came from a family of very active people. Her father was a bank manager, justice of the peace, vice president of the race club, auditor of the race club, chairman of the cemetery board, on other committees, etc. He would have been a busy man. He was into cricket and rifle shooting, and he had a fair interest in horse racing as well. Jessie's mother was a pretty active sort of a person as well. She sang in musicals, she sang solo as a soloist, and she participated in events in Southern Cross. After Southern Cross, the Beveridges were transferred to New Zealand, and Chubby finished her schooling in New Zealand. But Jessie would have started her schooling in Southern Cross. She would have done a fair bit more of it in Broken Hill and then finished off in New Zealand. After New Zealand, they moved back to their home state and hometown, Melbourne, and East St Kilda was where they'd originated from. And that's the family home, a two-storey house. Chubby got herself into the workforce and did very well at it. She did very well on a salary and commission, and she also inherited some money after her father died. At age 18, she married Keith Miller and became Mrs. Keith Miller. He was a journalist with the Weekly Times in Melbourne. You've probably heard of the paper, the Herald and Weekly Times. It still comes in the press, conversations. And so she became Mrs. Keith Miller, but Chubby to her friends. By 1926, Chubby and her husband decided they were better off living apart. And so she moved into a different way of life. And so 1927, turn a new page. Avro had produced the Avian. It was in competition with the Gypsy moth. And Avro were looking at means of promoting their aircraft. They were looking at promotion ideas from within the company and from outside. A person who took up the idea was Bill Lancaster. He took some of the ideas suggested by Avro and some of his own. He decided the best way to promote the aircraft would be to fly up to Australia. And his idea was to find, he would pay his own way. He suggested that Avro provide the aircraft, Shell Oil Company provide the fuel, and he provide his own finance for his expenses along the way. He also said that he would find another RAF pilot who would finance themselves as well. He had trouble finding the second pilot to finance his way, and then he came across Chubby at a party in London. Chubby was noted for having a generous purse, and she thought that it would be a good idea to fly to Australia. And so she took Bill to his word, and her dream was about to come true, to fly to Australia, be the first female to make it to Australia in an aircraft. Bit of background on Bill Lancaster. He was born in Birmingham in England. He emigrated to Australia before World War I. He joined the Australian Army. He later joined the Australian Flying Corps and flew in World War I. After World War I, he remained in Britain and joined the RAF, where he served as an officer for 8 years. And so this flight to Australia is coming as he leaves the Royal Air Force. And so in 1927, in the meantime, Bill Lancaster married and had 2 children, and he had to say goodbye to his wife as he and Chubby set out on this flight to Australia. It wasn't going to be a race. It was a promotional event where they were able to move at their own pace and enjoy what they were up to. Yeah, jump ahead of me. So they departed in October 1927. The route was through Europe to Egypt, and then across to India and down through Southeast Asia to Darwin. So there's the route that they took in red, and the black line, which was originally there, was the Imperial Airways route that eventually developed. But they had problems. Did they have problems? You bet. They had delays. The The day of departure was designed for a 9:30 getaway. The weather was foul. They had 100 people come to see them off. 25 photographers lined up to take photos, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon they were still on the ground. Most of the people had migrated to a nearby hotel, and so when they did depart at 4 o'clock there was only a few people to say goodbye. So they had bad weather throughout Europe, down through France, down through Italy. They went via Malta, and that's when the weather started to improve. But when they got to North Africa, sandstorms and dust storms. And these were all causing delays. So they were falling further and further behind the loose schedule that they had. They got to the other side, well, I think it was to Baghdad, and a magneto failed. It took 10 days in transit, and all in all took 16 days off their schedule while the magneto was repaired. They passed through an area near what's Pakistan, and there was a cholera scare, so they were impounded for a week just to see if they were carrying any of the disease with them. Another magneto repair. They were too far off the beaten track to get a replacement part, so Bill had to find a nearby village where there was an ancient lathe, and he manufactured a new part to fit into the aircraft. This took 3 or 4 days. Then they had a forced landing, an engine failure, and he landed in a rice paddy. The aircraft went up on its nose as it went into the damp landing area, and they then had to move the aircraft out. They had to decant the fuel, lift the aircraft out, move it to a place where it could take off, and then reinsert the fuel, all taking time, so another week taken up there. Snake in the cockpit. This is a fear which has been through my mind. When this club moved from Perth Airport to here, we were told to check our aircraft out very carefully to see if there are any snakes on board, because they do sneak in for a little bit of heat every now and then, a little bit of warmth. And I can remember thinking to myself, nothing would be worse than coming across a snake slithering around in the cockpit down near your feet. But anyway, this is what happened. They became airborne, and the snake was in the front cockpit. Chubby removed the joystick and battered the snake to death. And then they left Singapore, and they were doing very well, but the engine failed while they were at about 150 feet on takeoff, and I'm not quite sure exactly why, but they came down very heavily, badly damaging the aircraft. They were both injured. Progress hadn't been that good. It had been 91 days, 3 months to get that far. Smith Brothers were the first to fly to Australia. They flew in the air race of 1919. Also competing sort of on the fringe of that race was Parra and McIntosh. They finished 8 months late. They started late and finished 8 months late. And Alan Cobham, he flew to Australia in 1926 in 36 days. And so when Chubby and Bill set out, they were the only people who'd flown to Australia. And so Chubby was on the list, first woman to fly to Australia. Injuries: Chubby received a broken nose, 2 black eyes, a gash to a forehead. And Bill received mild concussion, so this put a bit of another delay. The aircraft had to be shipped back to Singapore for repairs, and both Bill and Chubby needed medical treatment and time to recover. And so they took a month off in the cool highlands to get to know each other and understand each other better. You're a mile ahead of me. And so if you were following the dates, it actually took them 3 months to get the aircraft back in order again to come to Australia. And so they took off and arrived in Darwin on March the 21st. There was a bit of a misunderstanding as to when and if they were arriving. There was only one person at the aerodrome when they arrived. But as time went on, they were recognised as celebrities. People came to the aerodrome on the following days, and there was a week of celebrations. They were instant celebrities. There were breakfasts and speeches, lunches and speeches, dinners and speeches. People were giving them money, and they were enjoying every minute of it. Chubby was reticent to explain her part in it, and she was saying, well, I was just a passenger and Bill did all the work. The flight had taken 159 days, and the last couple of weeks they were passed by a little upstart, like called Bert Hinkler, who took 15 and a half days. And so the newspapers were full of aeroplanes. Bert Hinkler breaking the record, beating everyone else, and of course Chubby being the first woman. Throughout the whole arrangement, the celebrations, etc., Chubby was referred to as Mrs. Keith Miller. Not Chubby at all, was she?
No.
They flew to Eagle Farm in Brisbane via outback Queensland, where Bill had been before World War I, and he was a popular figure there. And of course there were many stops, many discussions, many speeches, many lunches and dinners along the way. After Brisbane they went to Sydney, where there was more of the same, and then Canberra and Melbourne. Melbourne was different to the others because this is where Chubby had come from. And so they gave a series of talks. In fact, one of the movie theatres was showing the picture of the day, whatever, the main feature, and then afterwards Bill and Chubby would stand up and talk about their flight with a lantern slide support. Lantern slide was in those days the equivalent of a PowerPoint presentation as we've got today. By this time Chubby had developed a bit more confidence, and she was explaining how she'd participated in the event, and once again people were throwing money at them and inviting them out to lunch and dinner, and so it went on. It brought them money and fame. The celebrations had gone on for months, and in the meantime, in mid-year, Smithy flew the Pacific, and so the newspapers were still full of Chubby and Bill, but now they had a new headline to do with with Smithy, Charles Kingsford Smith. The crew, Lyon and Warner, were committed to spend 10 days with Smithy and Ulmer after the event, and after 10 days one of them went home, but Lyon was enjoying the publicity, so he hung around. Smithy and Ulmer were after publicity. That was what was going to be their forte for the future, become popular figures in aviation, so they would do whatever they could to boost their name. And Lyon came up with some outlandish ideas that he, in America, would have an aircraft built which would allow the crew to fly from Los Angeles to New York and then across the Atlantic. And this was going to be a bigger flight than anything that had taken place so far. And while he wanted to be commander, he wanted Bill and Chubby to come with him. He also suggested that movies could be made about that event and about the event that had taken place in their flight to Australia. So Bill and Chubby sailed for America for their new dream. Chubby was so popular through newspaper reports that she got a job immediately with an aircraft company selling aircraft engines, and Bill got a job selling British aircraft engines. Chubby decided to learn how to fly. And of course, she had such a background that she didn't find any difficulty in learning to fly. 13,000 nautical miles at about 90 miles an hour in the Afro-Avian gave her probably 160, 170 or more hours aviation experience, which was a fair poultice. And so she learnt to fly, and with good coaching and briefings from Bill, obviously, she became very popular, and she won powder puff events. She was competing with the top female aviators in the world. She was winning events, and she was making money out of it. Prize money was big, $200 this week, $500 the next week. She had a sponsor who was providing her with an aircraft and all the ongoing expenses. And so things were really going well. She became an international celebrity. So our girl from Southern Cross is now at the top of the heap of female aviators in the world. That's a photo of her and Bill in those years. This is all prior to, there's some glamour photos of her. Plenty of those in the newspapers over there. So they set up home in Florida, but the effects of the Great Depression began to take effect. So Bill had to leave Chubby in Miami and head for a job in Mexico. The job in Mexico wasn't all that it was made up to be. He found that the company was running drugs, and that wasn't to his liking. He was sending money home to Chubby for living expenses, and that caused a bit of a problem when he found that Chubby had taken in an author who was writing her life story, and the money he was sending home was not only supporting Chubby, but it was supporting the author as well. This author, Hayden Clark, was in fact a bigamist and a drug addict, and pretty much a hopeless case. So Clark and Chubby developed a relationship in Lancaster's absence. When he found out, he was pretty upset. So he hurried home. And there was friction, obviously, as the three of them were in the single house. Hayden Clark suffered a gun wound. It was thought that Bill did it, but Bill claimed that it was suicide. It just so happened that there were 2 suicide notes typed, and it was one was signed by Bill with a signature of Clark, and the other one had the initials of Clark on it. So things weren't very well stacked up for Bill, and for Chubby. She had to talk her way out of it as well. So he was charged with murder and the forgery of 2 notes. But after a long and bizarre trial, I think it was 4 months before it came to trial, and it was a 16-week trial, he talked his way out of it. Amazingly, in the summing up, the judge said that he'd never come a more impressive individual than Bill Lancaster. And so they were asked to leave America They claimed that they left of their own free will, but in the newspaper reports you can see that they were escorted to the separate ships. They weren't on the same ship. They were escorted to separate ships by the immigration department and watched every inch of the way while they left the country. So they weren't very popular figures. So a girl from Southern Cross was now at the bottom of the barrel. She'd been to the top of the heap. She'd done everything that she dreamed of doing, and now things were turning real bad for her. Bill, back in England, decided that he had to salvage his reputation. He must have still been suffering from that bump on the head when they crashed, because some of his decisions from here were very, very bad. He bought the Southern Cross liner from Charles Kingsford Smith. He attempted to break the record for a flight from England to Cape Town. The record on paper couldn't have been broken by him because his aircraft was 10 mile an hour slower than the aircraft that held the record. So he was really pushing it uphill from the word go, and the further he went, the worse it got. Initially he had adverse winds. He was pushing himself, and at times flying 30 hours straight without a break. He was landing for fuel at places where he hadn't scheduled a landing, and you can see here there's a set of arrows going off the track. He took off one evening and missed his heading by 75 degrees, flew around in circles and came back and landed again, had a couple of hours sleep and then set off again. This time only just aware of what he was up to. But anyway, he'd miscalculated his fuel and he forced landed. Not only did he force land, but he was 75 miles off the track that he had expected to follow. And he perished after 8 days. He used his logbook as a diary. He wrote page after page of experience under the wing of this aircraft in the driest part of the Algerian desert you could ever come across. Search was carried out, but they couldn't find him because he was so far off track. And he was eventually found by a French Army motorised patrol. As I said, it was a very remote part of the Algerian desert. But help came a little late for him. He wasn't found for 29 years.
Oh, you're a bit thirsty, right?
A bit thirsty by then. He had wrapped his logbook, oblique diary, in some fabric from the aircraft and wired it to the frame, and then passed away. And one of his notes in the logbook said, "I have no water, I'm waiting patiently, please come soon." But no one did. That's an extract from the diary. And that's the aircraft which is in the Queensland Museum. It was retrieved relatively recently in the 1980s from a storage outfit in Europe. And so Chubby lived on in England, and after Bill had been missing for quite a number of years, eventually married in 1936. She married a Mr. Pugh, and she became Chubby Pugh. And she passed away in 1972. Famous overseas, more famous in America than in Australia. In fact, in Australia, very few people knew much about her, and not many people know much about her now. Hopefully, there's about 80 or 90 people here today who know a fair bit about her. When she did pass away, there was a newspaper report in London where she was referred to as Chubby Pugh, aviatrix, central figure in the murder, trial, etc., etc. So people's memories were fairly long. we closed the book on Chubby Miller. There was a TV series, and I missed it. So yeah, a few of you saw it. Evidently, it's on disc, and you can get it out and have a look at it if you need to. I might, in retrospect, get it out and see what I can come up with. So that was the story of Mrs. Keith Miller and Bill Lancaster, the girl from Saga. Thank you.